One of the biggest decisions you have to make when planning a trip to Disneyland Paris is deciding which time of year to visit. This can really impact the cost and the queue times, so it's a factor many people take lots of consideration over. So today I'm going to give you a rundown of my 3 previous trips, one in November, one in March and one in May, to give you an idea of what visiting at different types of year will be like at Disneyland Paris. My name is Sophie from Most Magical Guides, and if you're returning to our channel then thank you so much, and if it's your first time then welcome. I make videos all about planning trips to Disneyland Paris and Disney World, and do some vlogs as well, so if you like trip vlogs to Disney, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Now typically when I visit Disneyland Paris I try and visit in lower seasons, just because it has shorter queue times and less crowds, and that's something I really enjoy. I tend to visit between November and March, as these tend to be the cheaper months and less busy, unless you're visiting at times such as Christmas or New Year. I also try and avoid UK and French school holidays and French public holidays, and tend to visit in the week rather than the weekends, so that I can kind of make the most of my trips and have the least amount of crowds possible. So now I'm going to run down the different types of experiences I had when I visited in November 2021, March 2022 and May 2022. So November was a month that I really enjoyed visiting in. It was cold, but it was sunny the entire time and the pricing was very good. It had really low wait times. I don't think I waited more than maybe 20 minutes maximum, and most rides were under 10 minutes, which was fantastic. So I managed to fit everything in that I wanted to do. Something else that's fantastic about November is at the beginning of the month you have the Halloween decorations and celebrations, and then towards the middle and end of the month is when Christmas starts. I happened to coincidentally be there the week when they did the changeover, and at first I was a bit worried, like, oh, I'm gonna miss out, but I actually had the best of both worlds, because when I arrived it was Halloween and when I left it was Christmas, and it was amazing to see the transformation. Visiting November is a really good way of experiencing these events, but for a cheaper price. If you wanted to go closer to Christmas to see the Christmas celebrations, it would be significantly more expensive. So this is a really good option. The weather in November will also be a bit better than in December. So this is a really good time for Christmas celebrations if you'd love to see Disney at that most magical time of year. The weather, of course, is a big factor. It was listed to be around 8 degrees each day when I was there. Some days in the mornings it ended up being -1, and by the afternoon it would have warmed up, but it is worth noting that the weather can be quite cold in November. As I said, I was very lucky. Even though it was cold, it was sunny every single day. So you needed to take layers, but you weren't having to worry about wet weather gear, stuff like that for my trip. So it was very lucky that you could contend with the cold with the layers. So really, those are the great pros about going in November. Very low queue times, really good pricing, and you get the Halloween and Christmas decorations and celebrations. Now we're going to look at the cons to visiting in November, because there are a few things that can impact your trip during that time of year. One of the first things to note is that the park shut quite early. Now because of this, in the evenings there wasn't loads to do. That is one of the downsides of Disneyland Paris, is that in the evenings there isn't a lot to do once the parks are shut. You can go and visit Disney Village and look in some of the shops, or maybe you could go to the Skyline Bar in the Art of Marvel Hotel, but other than that you have to find ways to entertain yourself. So what I tend to do is take devices with me so I can watch Netflix. All the hotels have free Wi-Fi, so if you want to just have entertainment in the evening, it's worth taking something with you just so that you've got that as an option. The one plus side to this is that the fireworks are at an earlier time. This can be really good if you are not a night owl and you like to go to bed early, or if you're travelling with kids and having to stay up really late for the fireworks could be a bit of a nightmare. Something else you will notice in November is some of the restaurants will be shut. They don't have all of the restaurants open all year round. Some of them only open in high season. So because of this, there are fewer restaurants to choose from. One good option is to eat in the parks during the day and then have your evening meals in either the hotels or in Disney Village, because where the parks do shut quite early, you may not want to have dinner about 4:30. That is quite early in the day. So the other option is to eat outside of the parks in the evenings, and that also gives you something to do. With travel, it's worth noting that things like the Eurostar don't always run a full service in quieter times of the year. So in November, the Eurostar only runs on certain days of the week, so this can kind of impact the length of your trip or the days that you can travel. The great thing about visiting in November is because the queues are a lot shorter, you don't need as many days. Combined with the fact that the hotels are cheaper, this is a really good option for a cheap and cheerful trip to Disneyland Paris. One thing I would factor into your cost is maybe adding a suitcase onto your flights if you are going to fly. Because of the weather, you will need layers and therefore you might need a bigger suitcase. So it's worth noting that you may need to add an additional bag just so that you can have all your warm clothes for the colder days. My next trip was in March 2022. This trip was a really fantastic trip. Again, I got a very, very good price. There were no school holidays, so the crowds were low, and it was a really great time of year to visit. Something I particularly liked about March over November was the weather was better. Now, when I say the weather was better, what I really mean is that it was warmer. So when you were out and about in the days, it was a lot easier because you weren't so cold. The downside was the weather was more unpredictable. So I had some very, very sunny days, then I had one day where it rained all day. Now, the good thing about Disneyland Paris is rainy days put off local people from visiting because they just come a different day. And therefore, the parks were so quiet. Everything was like a 5-10 minute wait, so that was super fantastic. Another thing that I really liked about visiting in March was that the park stayed open slightly later than in November. I think the park shut between 6 and 8 p.m. depending on which park you were visiting, so it was a really nice amount of time in the parks, and therefore it meant things like restaurants stayed open later, and also the fireworks were a good time. Just like in November, not all of the restaurants were open in March because again it is a lower season. I would say that there were slightly more open than in November, so that was another benefit, but it is just good to be aware that maybe not everywhere is going to be open, so just make sure you check ahead of your trip so you can see which restaurants are open so you know where you want to dine. And just like in November, because it was so much quieter in the parks, you didn't need as many days. I did go for 5 days, but by day 3 I'd literally done everything that I wanted to do, and it was just a great opportunity to keep going back to the things you enjoyed the most. But this is another good thing because if you wanted to just do a short trip, March is a great time of year to visit. For March, I did take a cabin case, and this was fine. I managed to get all the layers I needed. I took things like a vest, a t-shirt and a jumper just in case I did need to layer up, and that was fine, and I managed to fit that all in a cabin case, so I didn't need to pay for a larger case. But it is worth noting that you will take layers at that time of year, so just to consider that when you're packing. The pricing in March is also very, very good. This is a really good time of year if you want to go where the weather is slightly warmer, the parks are open slightly later, but the price is still really great. In March, the Eurostar still doesn't run every single day, so again you would need to factor that in. There's only certain days of the week that the Eurostar does operate a direct train to Disneyland Paris. Of course you could change in Paris and then get onto a normal train. There are other options, but for the direct train between November and March, it's normally a scaled down service, and in January it doesn't run at all often because they do line works at that time of year. My last trip to Disneyland Paris was in May 2022. This is not a month that I typically visit in because it is higher season. It's definitely not the same as visiting in the summer months or the summer school holidays where it will be super expensive, but May is slightly more expensive, and you do notice there are bigger crowds. May can be a great option if you can travel that time of year and you're wanting good weather, but you don't want to go in the height of season when it's super expensive. So May can be a really good compromise because you're getting the best of both worlds. If you do visit in May, the queue times will be much longer than in the off season, but I would say this is a great time if you are staying in Disneyland Paris to take advantage of extra magic hours. I did a video all about that and I'll put that down below. I think extra magic hours is one of the biggest perks for people staying in a Disneyland Paris hotel, so what I would say is definitely take advantage of that hour, hit the big rides, and then the rest of the day you can go on the rides that have shorter queues, so you're really maximising your time in the parks. Something I really enjoyed about visiting in May is the parks are open much later. This means that you could take breaks in the day. You had a lot more flexibility because you had a much longer period of time to fit everything in. It also meant that some of the restaurants were open for dinner as well as lunch inside the parks, so you had a bigger variety of restaurants to choose from, which I really enjoyed. One of the downsides to the parks being open so much later is that the fireworks always happen when the parks close, so that can mean a very, very late night. What some people do, particularly with children, is go back in the afternoon or evening to have a nap or a break and then come back out because it can be sometimes 11 p.m, which is super late. Another great thing about visiting in May is that the weather was so much better. I had bright sun every single day when I was there. It was probably almost too too hot. And the downside with that is that it is quite an exposed park, Disneyland Paris, both of the parks. There aren't lots of areas with shade and some of the queues are outside. So that can be a bit of a niggle if you aren't like a massive sun fan like I am. I much prefer being like hidden indoors like a little hermit. But the great thing is, you could pack light, you knew you were going to have great weather. Before I went, it did say that there was going to be rain every single day, and that didn't happen. But I just popped a little poncho in my bag just in case. But basically, I didn't have to pack very much at all. And in fact, I ended up only taking a backpack with me. So if you'd like to see how to pack very light for Disneyland Paris, I'll put that video down below. Something it is worth noting is that May was a more expensive time to visit, and that obviously makes sense because it's got the better weather and more people visit that time of year. And I would say, again, it's still more affordable than going in the height of summer, so it is a great compromise to go in May because you do get the nice weather. The ride queue times aren't crazy bad like they can be in the summer, and the prices are more affordable than in the very high season. But the pricing difference is more notable than if you were to travel in the off season between November and March. Something else that is beneficial is that there are much more travel options in May. The Eurostar runs every single day to Disneyland Paris directly, and there's more flights available as well. So this can really help you if you need to be able to be more flexible with your dates or the days you want to travel specifically. Something that's interesting about visiting in May is that because the queue times are longer, you may want to spend more days at Disneyland Paris. The downside to that is obviously that costs more with accommodation. A compromise could be doing something like purchasing Premier Access Ultimate. If you were only visiting for maybe 2 days, you could do one day where you get the 12 rides for a set price and you could join the much shorter queue, and that will help you fit so much more in. If you want to know more about Premier Access and Premier Access Ultimate, I've recently done a video all about that, and I will again put that in the description down below. So I would say that there's really no bad times to visit Disneyland Paris. The only things to factor in really are cost and crowd sizes. If you can visit between November and March, this is when you will get the most affordable accommodation and flights. And of course there are some downsides to take into account, but if you can't visit during that time, May is a really good option because it's still cheaper and less busy than the height of summer, so you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. So here are some tips to help you decide what time of year to visit Disneyland Paris. If you can travel in the week rather than on the weekends, this means you get lower crowds and also the accommodation is cheaper. For the very best prices, travel in low season between November and March. If you're able to, avoid the French and UK school holidays, and also check out things like public holidays or days off in France. And what I'll do is I'll leave a link to a website down below, and then you can kind of see what those dates are. During public holidays and school holidays, the parks are more busy, therefore more expensive. So if you can avoid these, you'll get much better deals and have less queue times. If you are staying at a Disneyland Paris hotel, make sure you use that benefit of extra magic hours. You get so much done in that extra hour. I actually think it's the best benefit for people staying at the Disney hotels. And then no matter what time of year you're visiting, you're getting so much more done in that first hour. But it's essential to use if you're traveling in higher season months. I would say that visiting in November and March are very similar. November was great for having kind of the lowest crowd sizes, but March I really enjoyed because the parks were open longer. Both of them have their pros and cons, but I would say these are probably my two favourite months to visit Disneyland Paris in. I hope this video has helped give you an insight into what it's like to visit Disneyland Paris at different times of the year and help you narrow down maybe the months you might visit in. Thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time, I hope you have a most magical day. Bye bye.